Western Australian Livestock Research Council's final edition of Livestock Matters at Manypeaks is a session with psychologist Dennis Hoiberg. Following a day of exploring livestock production matters, producers sat down with a beer in hand to hear some sage advice from a man who spends a lot of his professional time helping farmers build their emotional resilience.
When you hear that word resilience, what would you say? I've actually made a mistake, haven't I? I should have said, my name is Dennis Hoiberg, and over the next 40 minutes, we're going to have a conversation. And I'm going to ask you questions, okay? And when I ask you a question and scratch my nose, wouldn't mind a response, okay? But if I ask you a question and scratch my ear, that's just for your rhetorical question. So if I ask you the question, what does resilience mean to you? What word association do you go through, emotional reaction? What do you actually feel in your heart when you hear that word? That's one of those. Anyone? Have a crack? You can handle stuff, yeah? Good on you, yeah? What else? Go harder, yep, that's the word, yep. Toughen up, yep, deal with it, that's the one. The technical word for resilience is your ability to bounce back through change. That's what you read in the dictionary, bounce back through change. But when you think about going through change, one of the things you don't want to do is bounce back. And I reckon there are three types of people I work with. There are those people who look at me like a kangaroo in the headlights like I saw last night, or those people who are still angry at what happened, or those people who say, look, Dennis, it happened, we need to move on. So the way I define resilience is not your ability to bounce back through change, but rather your ability to bounce forward through change. Now, some of you people would say, Dennis, that is just semantics. Can I tell you it's not? Does anyone listening to me here know someone in your life who they're still cranky about stuff happened 10 years ago? They're still angry about it, you know? And they'll come up in the conversation over a cup of tea or a beer, and everyone goes, here we go again, you know? I work with communities all around Australia and overseas where something has happened and they're telling me about it, and they're telling me in really fresh terms what it was like. And I said, when was this? They say 5 to 7 years ago. Who knows people like that? You are not what we call emotionally resilient. You're in fact what we call emotionally resistant. So I just want to talk to you over the next little while about how do you become emotionally resilient, okay? Because it is a skill, and it is certainly a skill you need in regional rural Australia, but I also want to tell you it's a skill you need for life. So look, there's a couple of basic messages I want to give you about resilience. The first basic message about resilience I want to give you, folks, is you've got to learn to look after yourselves, okay? Because there's a basic truth in my business, and the basic truth is this. If you can't look after yourself, can't look after your family, and for most of us, family is the most important thing. But if you can't look after yourself, can't look after your family, can't look after your mates, and after family, mates the most important thing. If you can't look after yourself, can't look after your family, can't look after your mates, you can't look after what you do here. Now, folks, I want to tell you, I reckon there are people listening to me here that will spend more time worrying about what's happening out there than they spend worrying about themselves or their relationships. And there are three critical stages I need to get you through for you to be emotionally resilient. The first critical stage of our life is 0 to 7. Why is the first 7 years of our life so important to us in terms of emotional resilience, do you think? What's happening to ourselves in that era? Oh, sorry. That's one of them ones. Anyone know? 0 to 7? Who's got kids 0 to 7? Why is the first 7 years of our life so important, do you reckon, David? Yeah, learning. Guess who they learn from? By the time they're 7, we know we're dealing with a basic person. The next critical stage of our life is 12 to 19. Anyone got kids here 12 to 19? Why is 12 to 19 so important do you reckon, Murray? Hormones. Yeah, that's part of it, Ken. That's part of it. And there's all those changes. He said hormones. And then he giggled. He said hormones. Yeah, you're right. All those changes happening. 0 to 7 is who we are. 12 to 19 is where we fit in. The next critical stage of us to get through life, folks, for us to be resilient, is 55 to 70. Has anyone got kids here 55 to 70? Now, let me ask you, why is 55 to 70 such an important age profile for us to get through, for us to be resilient, do you think? What's happening to us in that age profile? Succession planning. Don't want to talk about it. Yeah, succession, you get kicked out. That's a good idea, succession planning. Look, in succession planning, just give it to the oldest boy. It will never go wrong. Yeah, what else is happening in that 55 to 70 age profile, do you reckon? I was only joking about that, by the way. You know that we used to think of all the change used to happen in the early part of our life. We know most of our change happens in 55 to 70 age profile. You're faced with mortality because you're losing some of your mates, financial stuff, kids stuff. Kids leave home, then they come back and they don't go. Health issues, career issues, succession planning issues. If there's one issue in rural communities that tears communities apart and families apart, is succession planning. And I spent so much time doing it. So many families I got who can't even spend Christmas with each other, you know. It's very sad. But also the other thing that people often think about is in that age profile is retiring. And if there's anyone in here in this group who's thinking of retiring, can I give you the heads up? Don't. Especially for 67% of Australian men. Guess what's going to happen to 67% of Australian men within 3 years of retiring? 3 things. They will either die. This is the happy part of my presentation too, by the way. They will either get a major illness like cancer or depression, or more likely they go back to work. Now that doesn't mean you have to not succeed or not move stuff on. There's always a role for you. So first critical message for you folks is learn to look after yourself. The next critical message I want to give you folks is you've got to learn to get over yourselves. How many people here, Esther? About 90, okay. If this is a typical group I work with, there's at least 9 to 10 people, and because there's more blokes than women here, there are probably about 15 to 18 people listening to me now who are struggling with something. Right? And you could be struggling emotionally, financially, with your mates, in the relationship, in the farm, financially, economically, health-wise. We all struggle. And I know in any audience I deal with, at least 10% of them are struggling. And if there's a high male proportion, then it's typically higher. I was up at Esperance early on last week, and this bloke said, I should have come and seen you earlier. I said, well, why didn't you? And he gave me the typical male response. He goes, well, you know. And guess what? I freaking don't know. Right? So get over yourselves, boys and girls. 10% of us are struggling, minimum. Next key message I want to give you about resilience, and it's a very basic message, and that is you got to have a good hard look at yourself. You got to understand your own values and your own what type of person you are. You got to really know who you are. There's a saying I have in my business, and you've heard this saying yourself: your vibe attracts your tribe. Now, if you're struggling, look at who's around you. Right? Now, who here has got kids? Who here makes sure our kids deal with good quality kids? That's social engineering in the very best form. I encourage you to make sure you're hanging around with good people, but you've got to have a look at yourself first of all. Next thing about resilience, folks, and this is a really key message, and it's this. Why do you folk do what you do? People say, Dennis, I'm really struggling. I said, well, mate, why are you doing what you're doing? And if you can't answer that, then you're in strife, okay? So if you can say to me, look me in the eye, look at each other in the eye and say, we do this because we love it, you're going to be okay for the rest of your life, okay? But make sure you remind yourself of that. Go home and write on your fridge, I do what I do because I love it. And I can tell you stories all around the world where a really strong why has got people through the worst possible times. One of the things I know at a psychological, emotional level, if you folk really understand why you're doing what you're doing, regardless of what's happened to you, you're going to be okay. So tonight, if you're in a relationship, go back and say to your partner or your whatever, why do we do what we do? And make sure you're all on the same page. That's the issue with succession planning, you know. Quite a few people aren't on the same page, so they've got very different objectives for the business. So understand your why. But the other thing about resilient people we know, folks, is that you've got to have very good habits. You really got to have really good habits. And this is one of the good things about region and rural, because you know time management is so important and personal management is so important. Typically, most of you have got very strong habits. Now, what we know also about our brain, folks, is our brain is lazy. Our brain is not designed to help us thrive. Our brain is only there to help us survive, right? So when you're talking about change, people are against change simply because it's a neuroscientific reason. Okay, so don't beat yourself up when you're struggling with something. There's an absolute technique around how you change what we call neuropathways. But the most important habit you need, folks, is sleep. Okay? Now, can I say to about the 12 people who are listening to me right now who don't sleep very well, you've got to bloody sleep very well, okay? You just got to sleep. Sleep is a fuel of resilience. So you've got to have good habits, folks. Next thing you've got to have is you've got to have what? Who's ever heard the expression positive thinkers? I'm talking to farmers. Whoops, sorry. Now, what I want you folk as farmers to do is to stop being positive thinkers. Okay? This is the difference between what I call process and outcome. And you know more than any other occupation I work with is none of you have got any control on outcome, do you? All you can do is do the process, can't you? Same with your thinking, right? Some people set objectives. And you've got to set objectives, right? They come to my office and they say, I'm really worried about my objectives, Dennis. I say, oh, yeah, what are you doing about them? Worrying about them. I go, mate, you've got a different way of doing it. What I want you to do is to be what I call cautiously optimistic. And that is, if you do this today, I'm going to achieve my objectives. Think about a major change or challenge you have in your life. Don't tell me what it is, doesn't matter. When you think about that major change or challenge in your life, what do you hear yourself say? Do you hear yourself say, I can do that? But is it realistic? There are some people I work with who are really positive thinkers. They're also totally freaking delusional. Other people I work with who are, they say, no, I can't do that, Dennis. And I say, is that realistic? They say, yeah, it is. And that's right. I mean, there's things you can't do, eh? Now, then what you have to do at a psychological level, and it's a really easy thing to do, is you have to do a thing we call emotional reframing. Who here got kids? Who got grandkids? One of the things we are good as parents at doing, I reckon, is we learn the skill of reframing. Because when our kids do something dumb, what we tend to do is help reframe them, okay? When my son he's now 33, when he was 16, he came to me and said, Dad, I'm going to run a marathon. I said, fantastic, mate. I said, when? He goes, Wednesday. I thought, right. I said, you want to walk around the house a couple of times? What? Let's run 100 metres together. Let's run 200 metres, 300 metres. And he said, this is quite hard, isn't it? I said, yes, it is. But now we did a couple of kilometres and 5 and 10, 15, 20, and he's still doing his running. And every time I see him running, I'm thinking to myself, I wonder what would have happened if I'd said to him that day, mate, don't be stupid, go back on your Mario or whatever it was and just play your Mario. Who's ever done that with your kids? Who's ever looked at the kids and say, mate, don't do it this way, do it that way? Right, that's what we call reframing. Now, I reckon parents naturally learn how to reframe because we love our kids, don't we? Right, you do it naturally. Now, my challenge to you folks, if we're reframing for other people, the obvious question I want to ask you is if you can reframe for other people, the obvious question I want to ask you folks is, guess what? Who's doing it for you? Right? Who's reframing your voice? Now, I want to tell you, there are different mindsets. Some people have a negative mindset, some have a positive mindset. And there's the word positive. But however you see the world is however you see the world. You have this little prison. Who knows anyone who's got what we call a negative mindset? Everything that happens to them, it's negative. There are other people who see things and have a positive view and they see positive things. You've got to be really aware of the voice in your head. Folks, beware of the inner voice in your own head and beware of the voice of other people in your head. And dads, be really careful of the way you talk to your sons, especially in succession planning. And sons, be really careful about it and tender with how you talk to your parents about succession planning. Because there are things that you do in the natural part of your business that are more difficult than any other sector I work with. Because you're dealing with raw emotion and raw legacies. That's why the inner voice is really important to you. The next thing you've got to do is be able to plan. Most people know what they've got to do, but they don't have a plan to be able to do it. And planning is a really important skill of resilience. But the last skill which I just want to talk to you about, if you don't mind, Tim, then we can have a beer, eh? What's the hardest thing for people to do you reckon? It's to do. It's to do. People come to my office and they go, oh, I know I should be doing this, Dennis. And I look at them and say, well, why aren't you? And I say, that's why I'm here, mate. That's why I charge them 10 sessions. You know, why do you reckon it's so hard for people to do you reckon? Most of you people know what you've got to do, you just don't know how to do it, or don't know what to do. Doing is one of the most humanly difficult things to do, folks. You know why? Up here. Our brain does not like change. Our brain likes status quo. Right? Status quo. So when you're going to do stuff, it's actually quite overwhelming. And what happens, people, and can I just talk to the blokes for a moment because it's more of a bloke thing, I reckon. What happens is we know what we've got to do, but our problems are so bloody big, we don't know where to start. And then we start to feel overwhelmed. And because we don't know where to start, we start to feel overwhelmed, so we start to feel incompetent. And then we start to have a very poor opinion of ourselves, and we have negative self-talk. And what you see is people going through a negative behavioural cycle, right? You actually have to do. I always say to people, look, just do something. There are 3 images I give people about change and how to do stuff. The first image is about the elephant. Ever seen an elephant? How do you eat an elephant, folks? One bite at a time. Well done, yeah. You break all your problems down. What can I do today? And that's what I call about the process of thinking. What can I do today? You identify what you can't do. There are some things you can't control. You can't control the weather. Don't worry about it. There's a website on the east coast of Australia called One Day Closer to Rain. And they said, what do you think of that, Dennis? I said, says who we're one day closer to rain. And please don't tell me you're going to run your business on something that's outside your control. Well, of course, it is one day closer to rain, but that's not going to how you're going to base it. So you've got to do the first image of the elephant. The next image of the elephant, the next image I want to give you is of the shark. Now, a bloke at Esperance said the other day, I'm wrong about this, but I'm going to still stick with this image, is of the shark. How does a shark die? Anyone know? When it stops moving, that's it. When it stops moving, what actually happens is it's you're very good. You've been putting up your hand all through the night. A shark dies when it stops moving, right? It suffocates, okay? Trick is don't stop moving. And the other image I want to give you about doing stuff is Ho Chi Minh City. Who's ever been to Ho Chi Minh City? Okay, make sure it's on your no, not during the army, no. Who's ever been to Ho Chi Minh City? Ho Chi Minh City, there's about 90 million people there. They all go to, there's no public transport system to speak of, and the traffic lights are, rather than red, they're the same colours, but they're more of a, if you want to stop, you can stop. If you don't want to stop, you can still go, that type of thing, you know. It makes Bali look organised. And I'm over there with my daughter once, and we're at this big roundabout, and we're trying to go across the markets, and we just looked at each other and we said, how do you get across the bloody road? 40 million people on the tuk-tuks. And we just, this old lady walked past us with some groceries, looked at us, and she just kept walking. And it was like Moses with the water. The motorbike just parted. Yeah, they just parted, yeah. And then she just disappeared in this heap of, and we just saw her go the other side. So we looked at each other and said, well, clearly all you got to bloody do is just walk. And guess what? We got on the other side. And that night we're talking to a few people. They said, yeah, that's what you do, Dennis and Ebony. You just got to move. He said, but I'll give you a tip, don't look back. Because if you look back, you'll go, bloody hell, right? Now that's another image about change, folks. One is, think of the elephant, break your problems down little bits, don't stop, and don't look back. Who's ever done anything in your life that you're really deeply ashamed of or saddened that you did? Every nanosecond of time you do that, you worry about that, it's wasted energy, folks, right? And it takes away from your positive energy, and that's what we need in terms of maintaining how to have a resilient lifestyle. So can I just say, Tim, thanks for the opportunity. Yes, once again, thanks for inviting me over. I want to give you people a bit of feedback about this property. Whose property is this? Are they around? Huh? Over there, mate. I spend a lot of time walking around farms. Most people try and chase me off them, but I like to walk around farms. And the first thing I always do, farms here in America, South Africa, there's one constant bloody thing I notice. Is that when you have a really well laid out farm, right, you can be assured that, which this is, I reckon, you can be assured that the person who's done that is very clear about their why. You can also be very, very clear that if you've got well laid out farm, folks, clear farm, clear mind, okay? So go back and have a look at your farm and tell me how's it laid out? Because there's a direct link between, if there's chaos in the farm, there's chaos up here, okay? Make sure this is clear and everything else is clear, so congratulations on this farm, mate. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to listen. I know I'll be around for a little while. We'll have a few beers together. And if you want to come and have a chat, come and have a chat.